Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Vered Kogan, and I'm thrilled to reintroduce you to Nir Eyal. Nir is the author of two award-winning books, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Nir has taught as a lecturer in marketing at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Design School, and he has sold two technology companies since 2003. And this is Nir's second time on the Mindset Game podcast. Really thrilled to have you back, Nir. Some of you may know that he was with us to share some amazing insights and strategies from his book, Indistractable. And I highly encourage you all, if you haven't already heard it, to go back and check that out. Today, we're going to be focusing on his book, Hooked, which is absolutely a must-read for anyone who cares about driving customer engagement, because it really helps to understand the mind of users and how people form habits. And of course, our mindset is a big part of that. And this is why I'm so grateful to have you back on the show, Nir. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored to be a repeat guest. Thank you.
So how about we jump right into to the book? And I'm actually curious as to why you chose to call it Hooked. What's behind the name?
Yeah, so it's meant to be a little bit provocative. A book needs to get a little bit of attention in order to get read. So it's an intentionally provocative title, but really is summed up. What the book is about is in the subtitle, which is how to build habit-forming products. It's not how to build addictive products. Just to clarify, an addiction is a persistent compulsive dependency on a behavior or substance that harms the user. We would never want to do that. In business, why would we want to harm the user? Not only is that incredibly unethical, it's also bad for business, right? People aren't stupid. If you harm them, you can trick them once, but they're not going to do business with you ever again. And they're going to tell all their friends not to do business with you either. So it's not about building addictions. It's about building habits. What are habits? Habits are impulses to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. So about half of what you do every single day is done out of habit. These behaviors that we can do with little or no conscious thought. And of course, this is a profoundly beneficial evolutionary trait that we have so that we can have our minds thinking about one thing while we're doing something else. So you can imagine, on the plains of the Serengeti 200,000 years ago, it would benefit our species to pick berries or to process something into food or whatever we were doing while we were talking to our tribe, our fellow tribe mates, or how that gets translated today, how you can have a phone call or listen to a podcast while you're in your car driving, right? Driving, the first time you learn how to drive, when you're a teenager, you're white knuckling it and you're thinking about everything. But then over time, you don't have to put as much conscious thought into it. You can do other things at the same time. So what I really wanted to do with Hooked was to democratize these techniques that are used by the world's most habit-forming products. So what comes to mind? What's the stickiest products on earth? These Silicon Valley tech giants, companies like Meta and Amazon and Google and Slack and Snapchat, these products that are so good at getting people hooked to their products. What I wanted to do was to steal their secrets and put them in a guide so that the rest of us who are building the kind of products that can improve people's lives with good habits can design with these principles in mind. And so since the book was published now 11 years ago, it's been used in every conceivable industry, from healthcare to financial services to education. A lot of education products use the book to get people hooked to healthy habits. So for example, Duolingo uses the hook model to get people hooked to learning a new language. Fitbod uses the hook model to get people hooked to exercise. And so that's really my mission with the book. I didn't write the book for the tech giants. They know these techniques. That's where I got these lessons learned. And so the idea was to bring them out to everyone who's building the kind of product or service that needs repeat engagement. The goal is to get people to use your product because they want to, not because they have to.
Wow. So I think a lot of the listeners probably are very curious right now. What are some of those key ingredients to get people to want to come back and use the product again?
So the key, the framework of the book is around what's called the hooked model. The hooked model is an experience designed to connect your user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. And it's through successive cycles, through these hooks, that our preferences are shaped and that our tastes take hold. And so the idea here is that if you can run your user through these 4 steps, that user experience, and you see this across the board with every habit forming product, you will find once you know to look for it, you can't unsee it. You'll see it in all sorts of products, online, offline, enterprise, consumer web. You see these same 4 steps repeated time and time again. And just to fly through these, step number 1 is a trigger. There are 2 kinds of triggers. We have external triggers. External triggers are things in our outside environment that tell us what to do. Click here, buy now, play this, anything in our outside environment, a television commercial, a billboard, anything that tells us what to do. In the online space, it's very often just a little click. That's the first step. That's the external trigger. There's another type of trigger I'll get back to in a minute. The next step of the hook model is called the action phase. The action is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The easiest thing the user can do to move on for the next step. So, and what we find is the easier the behavior is to do, the more likely people are to do it. That's the first rule of interaction design. And so that's a very, very important category. It's about removing friction. It's about making that key behavior, that key habit as easy as possible to do. So when you think about a habit forming product like Instagram, okay, so the external triggers, you get some notification, you open the app, that's the action, just open the app. That's all you got to do, just open the app. But if you can do that habitually, you get to the next step of the hook model, which is the variable reward. What we find is that habit forming products, they don't just give people what they want, they add an element of variability, a bit of mystery. And this variability is incredibly important. It was studied back in the 1940s and 50s, first by a psychologist by the name of B.F. Skinner. And Skinner found that when he took these pigeons, he put them in a box. Today we call this a Skinner box. And he allowed these pigeons to peck at the disc to get a little reward, a little food pellet. He could train these pigeons to peck at the disc and get a reward whenever they were hungry. Okay, no big deal. It's called operant conditioning. If you have pets at home, if you have kids at home, you probably train their behavior with this style of, if you do an action, there's a contingent reward. Now, one day Skinner walked into his lab and he realized he didn't have enough of these food pellets. He couldn't afford to give it to the pigeons every time they pecked at the disc. He could only afford to give it to them once in a while. And to his amazement, what he discovered was that the rate of response, the number of times the pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. And so this is what we see in all sorts of habit forming products. When you think about, let's take our Instagram example. There's uncertainty, there's mystery about what you might find when you open the app and start scrolling. When you think about the news, why do we have people who are news junkies, right? Well, the news is not about informing you about what's most important. No, it's about informing you about what's most sensational, right? It's about all these things that are happening in the world, all the blood and gore that's happening in the world, because that's what they know will sell, because it's new. The first 3 letters of news, NEW, it's new. It's what's happening now. You don't want to read yesterday's news. You want to know what's happening right now that you don't already know. What makes a movie fun to watch? What makes a book interesting to read? Why do we watch spectator sports? Who cares about some bouncing ball across a pitch or a court? It's all about variability. What makes gambling so habit forming, if not all out addictive? When you pull on that slot machine, there's uncertainty around what you might win when you play one of these games of chance. So a variable reward is at the heart of these habit forming products. Then finally, the last step of the hook model is called the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product to make it better with use. And this is really a revolution in manufacturing history, because if you think about it, in the history of manufacturing, products could not be customized, right? So Henry Ford is famous for saying you can have any color of Model T as long as it's black, because it was very hard for him to retool his factory and make a blue car and a red car and a green car. Well, now, 100-something years later, now manufacturers have gotten very good at it. But at the time, that was very, very difficult. Well, now, if you accelerate to today, when we use these habit-forming products like Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, Slack, Snapchat, Amazon, Google, all of these products, built into the user experience is the fact that they get better the more you use them. So unlike things in the physical world, your clothing, your car, your couch, those type of things lose value. They depreciate. Habit-forming products do the opposite. They appreciate with use because of the data that you're giving these companies to improve the product with use. So again, we can use that in our own products and services to help people build healthy habits in their lives, until The idea here, we started out with the external trigger. The ultimate goal of a habit forming product is to no longer require that external trigger. And this is really where it becomes very powerful, because if you think about it, we know that only 10% of the time that you check your phone, 10% is because of an external trigger. So only 10% of the time that you check your phone is it because of a ping, ding, or ring. The other 90% of the time is because of what we call an internal trigger, an uncomfortable emotional state. And we talked about this in the Indistractable interview as well. Knowing that fact, that 90% of the reason that we check our devices is because of uncertainty, boredom, fatigue, anxiety, knowing that not only makes us very powerful as consumers, it also makes us very powerful as product creators, because the ultimate goal is to no longer require that external trigger and get the user to a state where every time they feel a certain emotion, they are using a particular product. Okay. And that's, by the way, for everything we do, everything you do, whether it's, you're feeling hungry, you eat your favorite snack, you're feeling bored, you turn on the television, you're feeling anxious, you pray. Everything we do, right? There's no escaping it. Everything we do is about escaping some kind of emotional discomfort, everything. So what a habit forming product does is ultimately attach their product's use, their solution to that problem, to that emotional itch. And that's the hook model in a nutshell.
Wow. It's brilliant. And it makes sense, right? Especially since we consider that we've all used these kinds of tech products, if you will, and we can remember, feeling a certain feeling and wanting to reach, right, to get that feeling, right, to get that met,
or the relief of that feeling. Exactly. It's even the search for a pleasurable sensation. If you think about it, so, oh, that's so sad, isn't it? All that you're saying it's all about discomfort and uncomfortable sensations. What about wanting to feel good? Well, I would argue even wanting to feel good, right? Craving, desire, wanting, lusting, hunger, all of these things are themselves psychologically destabilizing. So that's a very important fact, that everything we do is about the desire to escape discomfort.
So from a perspective of designing products, right, to be kind of habit forming products, as you say, how do we do that, right? So think of an external trigger. What are some typical external triggers?
Sure, we see them every day. So any kind of call to action. So whether it's an email, whether it's a billboard, a television commercial, a radio ad, word of mouth, anything that gives you instruction for what to do next in your outside environment.
Got it. Okay. And then in terms of kind of the action, right? You basically said it's whatever is easiest, right? Path of least resistance, reducing that, removing that friction. What are some ideas, again, in that category of some actions that we can invite people to take that really are not requiring much effort?
So it really depends on the context. Is there a specific application perhaps we could dive into or break down? What type of habit do you have in mind?
Exactly. So what I'm thinking more, and again, the listeners will have their own context. I'm thinking more like in a manufacturing environment, or let's say I have a product, right? Like it could be, right, I've got my earpods, for example, here, right? So let's say something like that. I want people to get into the habit of using this, right?
Great.
Applying the model. How might we apply the model?
Sure. So what's the internal trigger? That's always the most important place to start, is what is the customer's need? What's their pain point? Not just on a functional level, but on a psychological level. So with AirPods, the internal trigger you'd want to attach that habit to might be boredom, right? You're in the car, or you're on the train, or you're going from place to place, and in between whatever it is you're doing, you've got a few minutes for your mind to wander. And so the source of the relief for boredom is entertainment. Well, how could I find entertainment? A million ways, right? I could read a book. I could talk to a friend. I could meditate. I could do 100 different things. They want you to use their product, right? Apple wants you to use AirPods. So the internal trigger, let's just say, for sake of discussion, is boredom. The action phase is to take the AirPod and put it in your ear. That's it. There's one more step, which is to hit the play button in whatever you're using to play music or a podcast or an audiobook. So let's say that's what it is. It's putting it in your ear and pushing the play button. Now, how simple is that? And how much easier is that, by the way, than what we used to do? For example, let's just compare. Okay. So I use AirPods here. I've got I've got some here in my pocket. So let's compare. Here I've got these AirPods. I take them out, I put them in my ear, and that's it. They're on. I'm not doing it because I know it'll take the audio away from my computer, but that's how easy it is. Versus, let's go, half a step back. Here are Bose headphones that cost me almost the same price. When I put these on, I got to hit this on button. I have to make sure it's paired with my computer. It takes me way longer, and look at the size. So what does that do compared to the moment they're trying to capture? Okay, here's a product that makes it incredibly easy. I mean, I literally always have this in my pocket, so it's always there. So what happened to the friction of using the product, of the intended habit? Super easy. Versus I can't carry this around, right? This is not habit forming in the context that they're going for of your everyday product. And I literally can't leave the house without my AirPods. What's the variable reward? The variable reward isn't designed into the product. It's actually something that's in cooperation with the product. The variable reward is the uncertainty around what you might get when you use the product. So in my case, when I'm going from place to place, I'm constantly listening to audiobooks and podcasts. So that uncertainty is built in, right? I'm going to listen to an episode of my favorite podcast. I'm curious about what's going to happen next in the audiobook. I'm listening to an article and I want to find what the conclusion of the article is going to be. So that the more I do that, I'm building this investment in the product of always depending on this as my source of relief to that emotional discomfort. So that would be a quick example of running through. That's a good example around these AirPods, how they become habit forming. And of course, one more thing with the investment phase is that you can customize the AirPods to your taste. So not only did you make the financial investment, of course, but you're also they've got a million different settings. Do you want noise canceling? Do you want ambient? Do you want dynamic range? There's all these settings that you can fiddle with to make the product totally suited to your needs. In fact, one other thing that they do that's brilliant, when you get the AirPods, they let you engrave them with your initials or some kind of emoji. Why do they do that? They do that because that is a form of investment. It's called the IKEA effect. The IKEA effect says that when you put effort into customizing something, to making something, just like, crappy IKEA furniture, why do we keep crappy IKEA furniture from our dorm room to our house, to our second house? What? Because we built it. We made it, right? Look, I did that, right? And so that effect of customizing a product is a form of psychological investment that goes into that investment phase of the hook and makes us more likely to use the product in the future.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it also makes me think of like even anything that we have attachment to, including like our children, if we have children, or our pets, or right, it's like the more that we are with them and invest in them and all of that, of course there's more attachment, right? And some
absolutely
like intention
yeah.
and also attention, goes into it as well, right? So that too, the more that I give attention to something with the same intention, I imagine again that also builds some of that circuitry, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to a playground and your kid bumps their knee, oh my gosh, God, you have to help your kid. You'll do anything for your kid. Want to make sure they're not hurt. If somebody else's kid gets hurt, that's a shame. Somebody should take care of them, right? Why? Because if you're a mother, you birthed that child. Talk about investment, right? You put so much effort into carrying the child, birthing the child. That was a traumatic experience of actually, birthing another human being. That was a lot of work. Rearing a child, there's so much investment. And of course, psychologically, there's probably no greater attachment to your own child.
Yeah. And again, just to play with that metaphor for a little bit more around the internal triggers, right? Sometimes when we feel certain emotions, let's say I feel sad, right? I may go to my pet, right? Because that is correlated with that, right? So again, with that, no, I don't want to call it a product, but you know what I mean? With that thing outside of me that can help me to soothe, right? To feel those or release those emotions, as you said. So now clearly for people to use this hooked model successfully, they need certain inputs, right? They need information, right? What are those internal triggers, right? Like in the example of boredom, right? What are the external triggers that work the best, right? What are some of the variable rewards that could speak the best, right, to our clients? What is easier for them, right? For example, the bulky headphones versus the earpods. So just from that research side of things, what advice do you have for people that are like, all right, Nir, this is an awesome model. I want to get this started. Tell me what I need to know to be successful.
Yeah, so it's really about, you got to read the book.
Of
I wish I
course.
had summarized everything into like a quick that my 30,000 foot view was about as short as I can make it. But this is exactly where we go through what's called the lean startup methodology. This was written by Eric Ries, and basically what we have to do is build, measure, learn. So build, measure, learn. So you build something, you experiment with it, you measure the results, you learn from those results, and then you run more experiments. So what the point of the hook model is, the whole idea behind it, it's not going to give you the right answer. It's going to give you a set of hypotheses that then you can go test. So if you have a product that you are trying to make habit forming, that you want people to use, very frequently, use it because they want to, not because they have to, and you're finding that, hey, your current product is just not cutting it, right? People say they like it, maybe they even buy it, but they don't use it. Well, then what do? You use it as a diagnostic tool to say, okay, let's look at the hook model and ask ourselves these 5 fundamental questions. What's the external trigger that prompts the user to action? What's the internal trigger? What's the customer's itch on a psychological level? What's the action phase, and how can it be made easier? Is the variable reward rewarding and yet leaves the user wanting more? And finally, the 5th question, the investment phase, what's the bit of work the user does to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? So if you ask yourself these 5 fundamental questions, either if you have a product in market and it's not sticky enough, you don't know why people aren't coming back, you use this as a diagnostic tool to say, okay, let's think of some potential hypotheses. How could we do it? Maybe we don't have the right internal trigger. Let's try a different one. Maybe we don't have the right variable rewards. What do those look like? And of course, I give you lots and lots of examples. So the idea here, it's not, I can't give you an answer that's always going to work. What I can do is prompt you with the right questions to have you give yourself the right answer, right? You already know the answer, likely. You just have so much on your plate, you don't know how to decide. So as opposed to asking the boss what they think, or even asking your customer what they think, I think what we should do first is to look through this through a consumer psychology lens, through decades of research that tell us not just what people will say they do, but actually predicts what they will do, because we understand them better than they understand themselves. So that's where we can look to consumer psychology for this model to help us come up with hypotheses to test. So the place to use the hook model is either if you have a product in market that you want to make sticky, but for some reason is not engaging enough, is not habit forming enough, or very, very early days where before you've done anything, before you've hired any engineers, before you've committed any code, before you've raised any money, sit down with a pen and paper, ask yourself these 5 questions, and make sure that if you are building the kind of product that necessitates repeat engagement, that you have the 4 steps of your hook model already in place.
Awesome. Quick question for you. How about a service? Let's say our company offers a service. How does this model change, if at all?
Sure. So this model is not for products that are not habit forming, meaning if they are not used with sufficient frequency. We know that there's a precipitous drop off in the likelihood of creating a habit if the behavior does not occur within a week's time or less. So the number one reason that a product will not be habit forming is a lack of frequency. So if it's a product like insurance, okay, let's take insurance. You don't use insurance, God forbid, right? You only use car insurance or home insurance or renter's insurance if something terrible happens, right? So you buy it and then you kind of forget it. It just sits there unless, God forbid, something terrible happens. So you don't need to form a habit with a product like car insurance. The problem is if you don't have some kind of sustainable competitive advantage, you're going to beat your competitors up with price and features, right? So you think about Geico car insurance, right? Everybody knows Geico car insurance. What's Geico car insurance big catchphrase? 15 minutes will save you 50% on car insurance, right? It's all about price. So what happens? Well, then their competitor comes around and says, oh yeah, 12 minutes will save you 20% in car insurance. Well, you're just beating each other up on price and features. And of course, we know what happens. That drives out all the margin of a product. So you need to have some kind of competitive advantage. And one of those competitive advantages, so that you're not beating each other up on price and features, is habit. You can have other competitive advantages. You can have intellectual property. You can have economies of scale. There's all kinds of competitive advantages. But one that's pretty, sustainable in terms of a way to build is a habit forming product. So that has to be designed into the product. And that can be for products as well as services, as long as that service is something that people use frequently enough to build a habit around.
I'm so grateful, Nir, for you coming back to the show and sharing with us this model that works. And again, people will be curious, and I invite them to read the book and to experience it for themselves and to learn. Like you said, it's something that we learn from, and to continue to improve and to get better results. So thank you for doing this work and for sharing it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. Great to see you again.